The obsidian spire of the High Synod pierced the purple gloom of the Ethelgard homeworld's upper atmosphere, a monument to a civilization that had conquered stars, but now trembled before the encroaching silence. Inside the great chamber, the air was recycled and sterile, carrying the faint, metallic taste of ozone and the underlying scent of fear that no amount of ventilation could scrub away. High Counselor Vrax stood at the apex of the central dais, his multifaceted eyes reflecting the holographic projection of the galaxy that hovered above the assembly. The projection was a tapestry of light, but the edges were fraying, consumed by an encroaching darkness that defied sensors and logic, the null. It was not merely an enemy fleet or a biological plague. It was an existential negation, a creeping rot in the fabric of spacetime that simply erased whatever it touched. Entire systems had vanished, their stars snuffed out not with a bang, but with a whimper, leaving behind only the cold, unyielding void. The Synod, representing the oldest and most powerful alliance in the known sector, was paralyzed. They had thrown their armadas at the null, unleashed energies that could boil oceans, and detonated singularities that should have torn holes in dimensions, yet the darkness only absorbed them, seemingly growing stronger with every act of aggression. Vrax shifted his weight, his chitinous armor scraping softly against the polished floor, a sound that echoed like a thunderclap in the terrified silence of the hall. He looked out at the delegates, the fluid aquatic hydrants floating in their suspension tanks, the crystalline lithivores who vibrated with low-frequency anxiety, and the ethereal, energy-based Etherians who flickered with dim, erratic light. They were the masters of the galaxy, the architects of the Great Peace, and they were dying. The debate on the floor had raged for cycles, circular and desperate, a cacophony of blame and panic masked by diplomatic protocol. Today, however, the agenda was different. Today they were discussing the newcomers, the Terrans. Vrax felt a ripple of disdain travel through his primary neural cluster at the thought. Humanity was a species of contradictions, short-lived, emotionally volatile, technologically uneven, and historically violent. They had stumbled onto the galactic stage mere generations ago, their ships utilitarian and ugly, their diplomatic manners brusque. They were the children of the galaxy, loud and messy, demanding a seat at a table they had not built. And yet, in this hour of desperation, the Synod had agreed to grant them a trial. It was not out of hope, Vrax knew, but out of a need for a scapegoat, a distraction to buy time for the real civilizations to formulate a plan. The proposal was cruel in its subtlety. The Terrans had requested a capital ship to join the Grand Armada, a vessel capable of integrating with the Synod's battle network. The Synod, in a vote driven by arrogance and spite, had decided to grant the request, but not with a dreadnought of Ethelgard manufacture or a Hydran biocruiser. They would give the humans the silent vigil. Vrax looked at the holographic manifest floating before him. The silent vigil was a relic, a ghost ship recovered from the ruins of a precursor civilization that had gone extinct millions of cycles ago. It was a hulk of unknown black metal, devoid of recognizable engines, weapons, or FTL drives. It was a tomb. Ethelgard engineers had spent centuries trying to activate it, to understand it, but it remained inert, a stubborn block of matter that absorbed scans and refused to interface with any known technology. It was considered cursed, a weak ship in the most profound sense, useless, dead, and ominous. Giving it to the humans was a calculated insult, a way to say, here is your place among us, in the graveyard of the forgotten. The humans, in their naive arrogance, had accepted. They had towed the hulk to their own shipyards, shrouded it in secrecy, and now, finally, they claimed it was ready. The Terran delegation approaches, the announcement chimed through the neural link, devoid of emotion. Vrax straightened his posture, signaling for the murmuring hall to fall silent. The massive blast doors at the far end of the chamber groaned open, and the humans entered. They were small compared to the towering Ethelgard or the sprawling lithivores, fragile creatures encased in environmental suits that looked primitive against the sleek aesthetics of the Synod. Leading them was Admiral Elias Thorne, a man whose face was lined with the stress of his species' perpetual struggle for survival. He walked with a gait that was neither aggressive nor submissive, but steady, a rhythmic marching pace that seemed to ignore the gravity of the room. Behind him walked a cadre of engineers and scientists, their eyes scanning the chamber not with awe, but with a detached, analytical curiosity. They stopped before the dais, looking up. At Vrax, there was no bowing, no elaborate gestures of fealty. Thorne simply nodded, a gesture of equals that sent a ripple of indignation through the assembly. Vrax suppressed the urge to scoff. Let them have their dignity for now, he thought. It would be stripped away soon enough when their scavenged ship failed to ignite, or worse, when the null swallowed them whole. High Counselor, Thorne's voice was amplified by his suit's translator, flattening the tonal nuances but retaining the steel in the timbre. "We have completed the refit of the vessel you provided. The USS Sea Aparin, formerly the Silent Vigil, is ready to join the line." The name change was noted. Aparin, an old Earth term for the infinite, the boundless, a lofty name for a corpse. Vrax gestured with a manipulator arm, summoning the tactical display. "We are." "Surprised, Admiral," Vrax said, his voice dripping with veiled condescension. "That vessel has lain dormant for eons. Our greatest minds could not coax a spark from its core. You claim to have succeeded where the Synod failed in such a short time?" Thorne did not blink. "We found that the ship did not respond to force, Counselor. It did not require ignition. It required understanding. We have interfaced with its architecture. It is ready." The vagueness was irritating. "And its armaments?" asked the Hydran representative, its voice bubbling through the liquid medium. "We scanned the hull before transfer. It possessed no weapon ports, no missile tubes, no emitters. Did you bolt kinetic drivers to the hull, glue primitive lasers to the flank?" A titter of amusement ran through the hall. Thorne waited for the laughter to die down. His expression did not change. "We have made the necessary modifications to ensure the ship can contribute to the defense of the galaxy. We do not rely on conventional payloads." The evasion was palpable. Vrax leaned forward, his compound eyes narrowing. "This is not a game of secrets, Admiral. The null is upon us. We gather the Grand Fleet at the Zenith sector in 3 cycles. If your ship is a liability, it will be left behind. We cannot afford weak links." Thorne's eyes met Vrax's, and for a moment the ancient alien felt a chill that had nothing to do with the room's temperature. There was something in the human's gaze, a depth, a heavy, sorrowful knowledge that felt out of place for such a young species. "The Aparin will be there, High Counselor," Thorne said quietly, "and it will not be the weak link. It may be the only thing that holds." With that, the humans turned and left, their boots echoing on the floor. Vrax watched them go, a sense of unease coiling in his gut. They were too calm. They had been given a piece of trash and treated it like a treasure. It was the arrogance of the ignorant, he assured himself. They did not know what they were walking into. None of them did. The gathering of the Grand Fleet at the Zenith sector was a spectacle of light and geometry that defied description. Thousands of vessels, representing the pinnacle of galactic engineering, hung in the void against the backdrop of a dying nebula. There were the Ethelgard dreadnoughts, massive spearheads of obsidian and gold, bristling with singularity projectors. There were the Hydran biosphere ships, shimmering globes of water and force fields that housed millions of warrior drones. There were the Lithivore dread barges, carved from asteroids and reinforced with crystalline lattice armor. And amidst this armada of titans, the human ship arrived. When the Aparin dropped out of warp, a hush fell over the communication frequencies. It was recognizable as the Silent Vigil, but it had changed. The matte black surface, once dead and light-absorbing, now pulsed with a faint, rhythmic luminescence, like the beating of a slow, deep heart. The humans had not bolted guns to the outside. Instead, the hull seemed to be shifting, the geometry of the ship subtly altering when looked at from different angles. It was disturbing to the eye, causing the sensors of the Ethelgard ships to glitch with error reports of impossible topography. It looked small compared to the flagships, fragile, a shard of midnight floating in a sea of steel. Vrax stood on the bridge of the Sovereign's Will, the mightiest warship ever constructed, and looked at the Aparin on the main screen. "Status report on the Terran vessel," he barked. "Energy readings are negligible, High Counselor," the tactical officer replied, confusion evident in his voice. "No reactor signature, no antimatter containment, no zero-point extraction. It's cold, but the gravitational lensing around it is fluctuating wildly. It's as if the ship is heavier than it should be, then lighter, then non-existent. I cannot get a lock." Vrax frowned. "They are masking their drive signature, primitive trickery." He dismissed it. The sensors blared an alarm. "Contact, the null is emerging." The philosophical debate was over, the slaughter was about to begin. The space ahead of the fleet didn't just open, it rotted. The stars in the distance dimmed and vanished as a tear in reality widened, a bleeding wound of absolute nothingness. From this void poured the swarms of the enemy, fractal shapes of impossible geometry, jagged shards of non-existence that moved not by propulsion, but by deleting the space between them and their target. "All fleets engage," Vrax commanded. "Pattern Delta 9, focus fire on the leading edge." The Grand Fleet erupted. Beams of coherent light, torpedoes loaded with antimatter, and gravity shear projectors lashed out in a blinding storm of destruction. The silence of space was filled with the electromagnetic scream of war. The first wave of the null swarm hit the barrage. For a moment it seemed to work. Explosions blossomed, shattering the fractal shapes. But then the horror set in. The null entities didn't die, they adapted. They absorbed the energy of the lasers, growing larger. They phased through the kinetic rounds. They flowed like oil over the shields of the forward cruisers, and where they touched, matter simply ceased to be. The Ethelgard cruiser Valiant was the first to fall. One moment it was firing, the next, its hull turned gray, then translucent, then dissolved into dust, its crew screaming silently as they were unmade. The panic on the comms was instantaneous. Weapons ineffective, they are adapting to the harmonics. Shields are failing, the void is eating the field generators. Retreat, we must retreat. Vrax watched the slaughter with a cold, sinking feeling of inevitability. It was as he had feared. The Synod was powerful, but this was a force of nature. You could not shoot a hurricane, you could not stab the night. "Hold the line," he roared, though he knew it was futile. "Where are the Terrans? Where is their boastful ship?" He looked at the tactical plot. The Aparin had not fired a single shot. It was drifting forward, moving away from the safety of the formation, heading directly into the teeth of the null swarm. "They are committing suicide," the tactical officer whispered. "They are sacrificing themselves to buy us seconds." Vrax felt a pang of unexpected pity. The foolish, brave, mud-born creatures. They were taking their garbage scow and ramming it down the throat of a god. "Let them die with honor," Vrax muttered. "Record their end. It will be a lesson for the archives." The Aparin continued its silent glide. It did not raise shields. It did not charge weapons. It simply moved. On the bridge of the human ship, the scene was starkly different from the frantic activity of the Ethelgard. The lighting was dim, amber, and soft. The crew sat at consoles that did not display targeting reticles or shield percentages, but complex, flowing streams of data that looked more like music scores or abstract equations. Admiral Thorne stood in the center, not in a command chair, but standing before a transparent sphere that glowed with a shifting, white light, the interface the humans had built to talk to the ship. "Sync rate at 99%, a communications officer said, her voice calm, almost meditative. "The localized reality manifold is destabilizing. The ship is listening." Thorne nodded. "Let them come closer. We need the density of the swarm to be absolute before we push back. Hold the anchor." The null swarm saw the lone ship and surged toward it, a tidal wave of erasure. To the alien observers, the human ship was about to be annihilated. But then something impossible happened. As the leading edge of the null wave touched the hull of the Aparin, it didn't dissolve the metal. Instead, the null shattered. It was as if the emptiness had hit a wall of absolute existence. A ripple of white light pulsed from the human ship, not a laser, but a wave of distortion. Where the wave passed, the laws of physics, which the null had been bending and breaking, suddenly snapped back into rigid, undeniable place. The fractal shards of the enemy, which relied on the fluidity of reality to exist, froze. They became solid. They became matter. And matter, unlike the void, could be broken. What are they doing?" Vrax stammered, his mandibles trembling. The sensors were screaming, but not with warnings of destruction. They were registering a massive surge in order. The entropy levels in the sector were plummeting. The Aparin was not firing energy, it was projecting law. "High Counselor," the science officer gasped, "the Terran ship. It's rewriting the local constants of the universe. It's increasing the Planck constant in the localized area. It's enforcing causality, the enemy. They cannot exist in a universe that makes sense. The humans are forcing them to obey physics." On the Aparin, Thorne watched the display. "Reality anchor deployed. The parameters are locked. Initiate the logic purge." He placed his hand on the glowing sphere. The ship groaned, a sound felt in the bones rather than heard. The modifications the humans had made became clear. They hadn't built a weapon. They had built a lens. They had realized that the ancient ship wasn't a warship, but a terraforming tool designed to stabilize young universes. The humans, with their innate need to define, to categorize, to structure the chaos of their own existence, were the perfect pilots for a machine that demanded will overpower. They were imposing their human definition of reality onto the chaos. "You do not exist," Thorne whispered to the void. "We deny you." The effect was cataclysmic. The shockwave of normalization expanded from the Aparin faster than light, carried on the substrate of the vacuum itself. The null swarm didn't explode, it calcified. The swirling, impossible geometries were forced into Euclidean shapes, cubes, spheres, tetrahedrons. Stripped of their metaphysical immunity, they became nothing more than debris. Then the Aparin's secondary systems engaged. The no-weapons assessment had been wrong. The ship had no cannons, but it had the ability to manipulate the debris it created. The calcified remains of the enemy were seized by gravity wells generated by the human ship and hurled back at the tier in space, a kinetic bombardment of the enemy's own dead bodies. The Grand Fleet watched in stunned silence as the weakest ship, dismantled the apocalyptic threat not with fire, but with philosophy made manifest. The tier in space, choked by the sudden influx of solid matter and the reassertion of physical laws, began to spasm. It could not sustain the breach in a region of space where reality was being held so tightly. With a final, silent shudder, the portal collapsed, severing the connection to the null. The stars returned, their light no longer eaten but shining clearly through the drifting dust of the defeated swarm. The Aparen hung in the center of the clearing, its pulsing light fading back to a steady, calm glow. It looked harmless again, a black brick in the dark. Vrax sank into his command throne, his legs giving way. The silence on the bridge was absolute. No one cheered. They were too terrified. They had witnessed something that made their singularity bombs look like firecrackers. They had seen a species take a broken tool and use it to edit the cosmos. "Hail them," Vrax whispered, his voice raspy. "Hail the Terrans." The screen flickered and Admiral Thorne's face appeared. He looked tired, sweat beading on his forehead, but his eyes were clear. He didn't look like a conqueror. He looked like a man who had just finished a long, hard shift at work. "The immediate threat is neutralized, High Counselor," Thorne said. "The breach is sealed. We recommend a quarantine of this sector until the local reality stabilizes. There may be residual fluctuations." Vrax stared at the human. "How?" was all he could ask. "How did you know that ship? It was a husk. It was dead." Thorne looked away for a moment, glancing at something off-screen. "It wasn't dead, Counselor. It was waiting. You looked at it and saw a weapon that wouldn't fire. We looked at it and saw a question that needed an answer. You tried to force it to kill. We asked it to heal." He paused, looking back at the alien leader. "The null isn't an army, it's entropy, it's the universe forgetting itself. You can't fight forgetfulness with bombs. You fight it with memory, with assertion. We just reminded the universe of what it's supposed to be." The implications of the victory rippled through the Synod like a shockwave. The political landscape was shattered. The weak humans were no longer the scavengers at the table. They were the ones holding the pen that wrote the rules. The Aparen was not just a ship. It was a symbol of a new paradigm. But the story was not over. As the fleet began to recover and the initial shock faded into wary respect, the humans detected something else. The Aparen, having opened its senses to the substrate of reality, was picking up a signal. It was faint, buried beneath the cosmic background radiation, coming from a coordinate that didn't exist on any star chart, a place between the folds of space. Vrax and a delegation of the highest Synod leaders shuttled over to the Aparen. It was unprecedented for the High Counselor to step foot on a Terran vessel, let alone a converted relic, but the power dynamic had shifted. Walking through the corridors of the human ship, Vrax was struck by the atmosphere. It wasn't militaristic. It felt like a monastery or a library. The crew moved with quiet purpose. The walls of the ancient ship, once cold and dead, now hummed with a warmth that penetrated the environmental suits of the aliens. They reached the bridge, the sanctum as the humans called it now. Thorne was waiting. "We have found something," Thorne said, skipping the pleasantries. "When we anchored reality to seal the breach, we caught a reflection, an echo." He gestured to the central sphere. It was displaying a waveform that was repeating, complex and structured. "This isn't random noise, it's a message." The Hydran delegate bubbled. "From the enemy?" "No," Thorne said. "From the ones who built this ship, the precursors, the architects, whatever you want to call them." Vrax moved closer, entranced. "They are extinct. They have been gone for eons." "Their bodies, yes," Thorne replied. "But they left this ship, and they left this message. We think the null wasn't an invasion. It was a reaction, an immune response." "Explain," Vrax demanded, the fear returning. "The universe," Thorne said, his voice dropping to a whisper, "is artificial, or at least it's a construct. A garden. The architects built it or cultivated it. The null is the weed killer. It comes when the garden gets overgrown or when it starts to rot." He looked at the aliens, then at his own crew. "We've been fighting the gardeners, but the Aparen, it's their tool. By using it, we proved we aren't weeds. We proved we can be gardeners, too." The revelation hung heavy in the air. The wars, the politics, the struggles of the Synod, it all felt suddenly small. They were microbes in a petri dish realizing they could speak to the scientist. "The signal," Thorne continued, "is a set of coordinates, not in this galaxy, not in this time. It's a door. The Aparen can open it." Vrax looked at the human, really looked at him, realizing that the weakest ship was actually the key to the next stage of existence. "If you open it," Vrax asked, "what will happen?" Thorne smiled, a genuine, tired, hopeful smile. "We stop surviving. We start living. We rewrite reality not just to stop the bad, but to build the good. But we can't do it alone. The ship requires a composite mind to navigate the next layer. It needs the logic of the Ethelgard, the adaptability of the Hydrans, the resilience of the Lithivores, and whatever it is we humans bring. Stubbornness, Vrax suggested, his tone softening. Insanity. Hope, Thorn corrected gently. Unreasonable, illogical hope. The ending of the conflict wasn't a parade or a treaty signing. It was emerging. The Grand Fleet didn't disband, it evolved. Under the guidance of the humans and the Aparin, the Synod began the great work. They weren't just defending their borders anymore, they were stabilizing the crumbling edges of the universe. The humans, once looked down upon as the chaotic children of the galaxy, became the steady hand at the tiller, the ones who could look into the abyss of the null and say no. And high above the galactic plane, the Aparin hung, a bridge between the finite and the infinite. The aliens had given the humans the weakest ship in the fleet, a discarded husk of a forgotten age. They had watched with scorn, then fear, then awe. They had expected the humans to fail, to break, to die. Instead, they watched them take a broken thing and use it to heal the world. They watched them rewrite reality, not with the force of arms, but with the power of a single, unified will. And as Vrax stood on the bridge of the human ship, looking out at the stars that were no longer fading but burning brighter than ever, he realized that the humans hadn't rewritten reality alone. They had forced the aliens to rewrite their own reality, their own prejudices, and their own understanding of what it meant to be strong. The weak ship was the strongest of them all, because it was the only one that knew its purpose was not to destroy, but to create. The universe was vast, dark, and filled with terrors. But as long as the Aparin stood watch, anchored by the indomitable spirit of humanity and supported by the unity of the Synod, the darkness would have to wait. The gardeners were awake, and the harvest was just beginning. The transition from the battlefield to the new era was not immediate. In the cycles that followed the Battle of the Zenith Sector, the galaxy found itself in a state of vertigo. The realization that physics was malleable, that reality was a consensus rather than a constant, shook the foundations of every civilization in the Synod. The Ethelgard science academies were in turmoil, rewriting textbooks that had stood for thousands of years. The religious castes of the Lithivors interpreted the event as a messianic arrival, causing schisms in their crystal hives. But amidst the chaos, the Aparin remained the calm center of the storm. It stayed in the Zenith sector, monitoring the scar where the null had broken through. The humans did not hoard the technology. In a move that baffled the paranoid Ethelgard High Command, Thorn invited engineers from every species to board the ship to study the reality anchor, to understand the interface. This openness was a weapon in itself. It disarmed the political maneuvering that Vrax had prepared. How could he conspire against a species that gave away the secrets of godhood? The humans were playing a game of diplomacy that operated on a level the Synod hadn't encountered. Before radical transparency, they reasoned that if the universe was breaking, hoarding the glue was suicide. Vrax found himself spending more time on the Aparin than on the Sovereign's will. He told himself it was for surveillance, to ensure the humans didn't turn the weapon on the Synod, but deep down, he knew it was fascination. He wanted to understand the human factor. One evening during the ship's night cycle, Vrax found Thorn in the observation blister looking out at the nebula. "You are troubled, High Counselor," Thorn said, not turning around. Vrax approached, his heavy footsteps dampened by the human carpeting. "Troubled is an insufficient term, Admiral. You have overturned the natural order. You have made the weak strong and the strong irrelevant. My fleet, my beautiful, terrible fleet, is obsolete. Why build a dreadnought when you can simply wish the enemy out of existence?" Thorn turned, holding a mug of steaming liquid. "You misunderstand the machine, Vrax. It's not a genie, it's not magic, it's a lever. But a lever needs a fulcrum, and it needs effort to move. The effort is mental, spiritual, it drains us. My crew, they are exhausted. Every time we engage the anchor, we have to hold the concept of the universe in our minds. We have to believe in the laws of physics harder than the enemy believes in the void. It's not infinite. We can break." Thorn took a sip of his drink. "Your dreadnoughts aren't obsolete. We need them. We are the shield, but you are the sword. If we lose focus, if we falter, the null comes back. And when it does, we'll need your plasma beams to buy us time to think." Vrax considered this. It was a comforting lie, perhaps, or a strategic truth. "You speak of the null returning. You believe this was only the first wave." "The signal," Thorn reminded him. "The message from the architects, it's a warning system. It's telling us that the immune response is systemic. The universe is running a fever, Vrax. We are the antibodies, but we are few." The integration of the fleets began in earnest. Ethelgard reactors were installed to power the Aparin's secondary systems, relieving the strain on the human crew. Hydron biological processors were linked to the ship's navigation, allowing for faster calculation of slipspace vectors. Lithivor crystalline armor was plated over the hull, reinforcing the ancient metal. The weak ship became a chimera, a physical manifestation of the Alliance, and as the ship changed, so did the crew. Ethelgard warriors stood guard in the corridors alongside human marines. Hydran scholars floated in tanks in the science labs, debating quantum mechanics with human physicists. It was messy, friction-filled, and difficult. There were cultural misunderstandings, dietary incompatibility, and ancient grudges flaring up in the mess hall. But it worked. It worked because every time they looked out a viewport, they saw the scar in space, the reminder of what waited in the dark. Then came the second signal. It was different this time, closer, louder, and urgent. The Aparan sensors picked it up originating from the Sagittarian arm deep in uncharted space. It wasn't a message, it was a distress beacon, but it was coded in the architect's language. "They are still out there," Vrax asked, looking at the display. "Or something else is using their frequency," Thorn replied grimly. "We have to go. If there are survivors of the precursor race, or if there is another reality anchor out there, we need it." The expedition was launched. The Aparan, flanked by a select task force of the Synod's fastest ships, jumped into the unknown. They found a system in ruin. Planets were cracked, stars were being drained of their plasma by massive, invisible tendrils, and in the center, orbiting a dying black hole, was a station. It was immense, a ring world built of the same black material as the Aparan, but it was infested. The Null was here not as a swarm, but as a corruption. The station was flickering, phasing in and out of reality. "It's a processing node," the Etherian delegate whispered, its light dimming in horror. "They are eating the data. They are erasing the history stored there." Thorn realized the stakes immediately. If they erase the architect's history, they erase the blueprint of the universe. If that station falls, the laws of physics might unravel everywhere, not just locally. We have to stabilize it. The battle for the architect ring was unlike the open warfare of the Zenith sector. It was a siege. The Aparan had to get close enough to the station to extend its reality field, to harden the station back into existence. But the Null corruption was fighting back, launching psychic attacks against the crew. Vrax felt it, a cold whisper in his mind telling him that his empire was dust, that his life was meaningless, that he should just lie down and sleep. He saw his crew collapsing, seizing. Even the humans were stumbling, bleeding from their nose. "Ease." "Thorn," Vrax shouted over the comms. "The crew is failing, the psychic pressure is too high." On the bridge, Thorn was on his knees, gripping the console. The light of the interface sphere was flickering, turning a sickly gray. "I can't hold it," Thorn gasped. "There's too much despair." It was then that Vrax understood the true strength of the humans. It wasn't that they were immune to despair, it was that they functioned despite it, but even they had limits. They needed help. Vrax looked at his tactical officer. "Open a channel to the entire fleet. Link every mind, Ethelgard, Hydran, Lithivor, all of us." "High Counselor, that is forbidden. Direct neural linkage with other species causes madness." "Do it," Vrax roared. "Madness is better than oblivion." The link was established. Vrax felt his mind expand violently. He felt the cool, flowing thoughts of the Hydrans, the slow, tectonic rumbling of the Lithivors, the frantic, buzzing energy of the humans. It was a cacophony, a chaotic storm of consciousness. But then he felt Thorn's mind in the center, acting as the conductor. The human was taking the pain, the fear, the anger of 5 different species and weaving it into a weapon. "We are here," the thought wasn't spoken. It was screamed by thousands of minds at once through the Aparan's amplifier. "We exist. We matter." The Aparan flared with a light that blinded the sensors. The reality field exploded outward, slamming into the ring. The Null corruption shrieked, a psychic sound that shattered glass on the ships and burned away. The station solidified. The black hole's accretion disk ignited with golden fire. The universe in that sector snapped back into focus with a violence that sent the fleet tumbling. Silence returned. The link was severed, leaving Vrax gasping, his mind feeling raw and overexposed. He looked at the screen. The ring was safe. The Aparan was dark, drifting. "Status," Vrax croaked. "Life support on the Terran ship is critical," the medic reported. "They took the brunt of the feedback." Vrax did not hesitate. "Prepare boarding parties, medical teams, we are saving them." When they reached the bridge of the Aparan, they found Thorn unconscious but breathing. The human crew was battered, unconscious, or weeping, but alive. The interface sphere was cracked, its light extinguished. They had pushed the machine past its limit. They had pushed themselves past their limit. Days later, in the medical bay of the Sovereign's will, Thorn awoke. Vrax was waiting. "You were foolish," Vrax said, though his voice lacked its usual bite. "You almost burned out your entire species' neural pathways," Thorn smiled weakly. "Did it work?" "It worked," Vrax admitted. The station is secure, the data is intact. We are downloading the architect's archives now. It contains everything, maps of the multiverse, instructions for engine designs we couldn't dream of, the cure for the null. Thorn closed his eyes, relief washing over him. Good, then we can rest. No, Vrax said, standing up. You cannot rest. The Synod has voted. We are restructuring. The Aparin is to be the flagship of the new armada, and you, Elias Thorn, are to be the supreme commander. Thorn laughed, a dry, raspy sound. I'm just a human, Vrax. We're the new kids. You really want us leading. Vrax looked out the viewport at the repaired Aparin, which was already being attended to by swarms of repair drones from every species. You are not just humans anymore, Elias. You are the glue. You proved that the weakest ship could hold the weight of the galaxy. You proved that reality is what we decide it is, and I have decided. Vrax paused, a flicker of something like friendship in his alien eyes. That I prefer your reality to the one we had before. The galaxy had changed. The fear was gone, replaced by a terrifying, exhilarating purpose. The null was still out there, lurking in the deep dark, but the civilizations of the Synod were no longer prey. They were the architects of their own future now. They had looked into the abyss, and with the help of a scavenged ship and a stubborn species, they had made the abyss blink. The Aparin was refitted, stronger than before. Its hull was a patchwork of galactic technology, a testament to unity. And as it prepared to jump to the next set of coordinates, hunting the darkness, the entire Grand Fleet fell into formation behind it, not out of obligation, but out of trust. The humans had rewritten reality, yes, but more importantly, they had rewritten the definition of us. And that was a force stronger than any physics. The stars awaited, and for the first time in eons they looked welcoming.